I'm Andy.
I'm Wes.
We're from D6 Evolution, and we're here to talk about how you can improve your game of 40k. Now, we don't pretend to be the best 40k players.
You pretend to.
I pretend. You're clearly not.
It's only because you cheat. That's fine.
I do cheat.
True.
So we thought we'd do a section of videos on how to improve your game. Today we're going to have a chat about specifically sort of pre-game and deployment, because essentially you can lose your game before you even start if you do it wrong. So what's your thoughts about pre-game? What's the most important things to you?
I think for me it's checking over the list of your opponent first, having an idea what he's got and how you're going to counter it, and trying to second guess essentially what he's going to be doing at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's impossible to learn everything about every army in 40k. So if you come across an army you don't know, find out the major things about it. So find out what his killer units are, find out about the range of his guns, and find out how far things move, and find out any sort of key psychic powers. They're the sort of key things, and write them down on his army list. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually. Just taking a couple of moments before starting the game to go through his or their list and just ask a few questions about, especially what you're talking about, threat range there, and trying to figure that out before the actual game begins.
So once you know the army, the next thing is figuring out how you're going to counter that army. And in particular, when you're thinking about objective placements, you've got to compare your army to theirs. So are you faster than them? Are you slower? If you're faster than them, you want to spread those objectives out as far as you possibly can. Put them in the corner of the board.
Yeah. And especially if they're a gunline army as well, they're going to want to sit back in place as well. So if I get the first objective placement, I can put it somewhere I know it's going to interrupt their deployment. I find that quite a good trick actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Putting an objective near cover but not in cover stops them from putting that objective in cover, because it's got to be 12 inches away from it.
You're essentially creating a 12-inch bubble where they can't place another objective.
Yeah,
it's a really useful tactic.
Yeah. Now if they're a close combat army, think about they're going to want to dominate the middle of the board, and by placing your objectives on the, in the corner, then you're going to stop them from wanting to put all their units in the middle of the board. The other thing to think about is think where their army can go and where it can't go. So, for example, if you've got an all-flying army like your Harlequins, they can go everywhere. So I'm just going to stop thinking about it.
Harlequins.
Whereas if there's a whole army of Imperial Knights, because some guys do that, they can't go in buildings. They can't go in ruins on first floors.
Or bikers for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. My poor Raven Wing. Put all those objectives on first floor ruins, they can't touch them. Yeah, it's a really nasty trick. It means half the objectives are out of play for them. Any other thoughts about sort of deployment?
I think you've covered the sort of basics there for what we want to discuss.
I think the key thing is where you place the objectives is where the whole game's going to revolve around. So if you place all the objectives in the middle because you're a close combat army, that's where all the action's going to happen. If you place them at the edges of the board, that's people are going to be chasing out there.
Absolutely.
So, next thing to talk about is deployment.
Yeah, games are won or lost in deployment at times.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say key things are, don't give your game plan away early. Don't give away where you're going to put that key unit. Such as this big bad boy of an Imperial Knight here. People want to know where he's going to be placed, but I'm not going to put him down to the end. So I'd say, think about it in this way. Have you got infiltrators like scouts? If you've got scouts and they've got scouts as well, they need to go down first, because you're going to compete for the same board space, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the classic units just do that are scouts and nurglings. I don't think there's anything else which does the same thing as there.
Not that I can think about hand.
No,
not yet anyway.
Not anything which actually deploys outside your deployment zone in the deployment phase. Next thing, now if they don't have any other scouts of their own, you can deploy them much later. So the next thing to think about is just start null deploying against them, so you don't tell your opponent where you're going to have anything. So things which deep strike or have equivalent deep strike sort of rules. So assassins. So I put all my Eversaw assassins in reserve straight away.
It's nothing more satisfying than going, yeah, this next deployment It's in reserve.
Yeah.
It's in reserve.
Yeah, absolutely. So your opponent's just putting units down on the table, giving his whole deployment away,
Absolutely.
where you're telling them nothing. Yeah, that's great. That is really good for doing that. And don't put your important units down to last. I think that's key.
Yeah, it's big super killer units. They really need to go down last. Sort of the centres of gravity for your actual list really need to be the last thing to place.
So like for my Dark Angels, for example, as soon as I put my Dark Shroud down, people know where I'm deploying because they know I'm going to put my Filthy Fire Raptors next to it. They know everything's going to be in that bubble, so they know exactly where I'm going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't put that Dark Shroud down till nearly last because, it gives my whole deployment away. Now, when your opponent has given his deployment away, because at some point he has to put his killer units down. Yeah. So, talk me through sort of pre-measuring.
Yeah, so pre-measure is the key actually. It comes back from your pre-game activity really of working out what ranges your enemy has. So you have to ask sort of key questions about what sort of ranges do your weapon have, and then you have to factor in any sort of movement of the unit into that as well. So if you've got a 24-inch range weapon and you've got a unit that moves 12 inches, well, their effective range then is 36 inches.
Yeah.
But other things to factor in as well, if they're a heavy weapon, is actually you don't necessarily have to worry about so much in terms of if they're going to move, they're going to get -1 to hit as well. So that's something to factor in as well. So if they've got a 24-inch weapon that's heavy, going at 25 means that in order to get into effective range there, they have to move and get a -1 to hit.
Yeah, so the classic thing would be assault cannons on a Razorback. You deploy, for your Harlequins, you want to be in assault, you don't want to go back as far as, you want to be as far forward as you physically can, but you want to deploy at 25 inches, so that if they get the first turn, they have to move forward at least an inch to get into range, so then they're suddenly an extra -1 to hit because they're heavy.
Absolutely.
Other classic ones are those Castellan robots with their 36-inch guns. You deploy at 37 inches, you make sure they're hitting you on 5s. It's absolutely key to not being sort of killed from the start of the game. Other things to think about are charge ranges. Now it's 8th edition, there are a lot of things which can do turn 1 charges. Things classically can move sort of 14, 16 inches, they can then advance and assault after that. So you have to think about not only what is the maximum charge range, but what's their sort of likely charge range as well.
Yeah, the things to think about as well, actually, a trick that I use with the Harlequins is actually the disembarkment itself gives you an extra couple of inches there as well to that range as well. So think about where they've placed them in the first.
Yeah, and the point I will literally measure from their units to my units just to be absolutely sure and agree with your opponent beforehand. Say this unit is 25 inches away, and if their maximum threat range is 24, you both know that you can't charge, because sometimes in the first turn things move a little bit further than they should have.
They certainly do. Especially when they're playing against you.
Yeah, absolutely. my 9-inch move Space Marines are epic.
Oh, yeah. Your wife loves you and your 9 inches. That's good. Another key thing I use as well is actually just putting a dice down. Once you have measured that 24 inches, you pull a dice down that 24-inch point so you know that anything beyond that is technically safe at that point.
Yeah. I think that's the main thing to say about sort of pre-measuring. Anything else you can think about deployment?
Just think about your screens really. That's probably the next thing to sort of bring ourselves onto.
Yeah. I mean, what we will say about screening is at some point we're going to do a whole video dedicated to the different sorts of screening. But I'd say from deployment, there's probably the main sort of screening you're going to be thinking about is deep strike. So for anyone, I'm sure everyone knows by now that you have to be 9 inches away from enemy models when you deep strike. So at minimum, people are going to need a sort of 9-inch charge off you, or they're going to be 9 inches away from you when they come in. Now, so I say every unit should have some way of something like scouts. Scouts or nurglings are the classic things which can really push forward your sort of area of denial for deep strike. So scouts, for example, you should deploy them 18 inches away from the rest of your force if your opponent's got deep strikers you're concerned about. So because they physically can't fit 9 inches either side between your scouts and your main force.
Okay. So what about people who don't have that infiltrate sort of ability? Can use the scout to screen them?
Most codexes have something which either deploy in the deployment phase, or that there's other ones which deploy just as the game starts. I think Imperial Guard have Scout Sentinels which can move forwards. I think they have Ratlings as well. Every army generally has something. If for whatever reason your army doesn't have that option, you can employ a sort of a hard screen as such. You can put your Imperial Guard troops at your front, or whatever other sort of chaff unit, and just deploy right at the back of your deployment zone your sort of valuable units. Obviously you're at a little bit of a disadvantage. If your army has the option to take a unit which can deploy outside of your deployment zone, you should probably be taking it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I think every Space Marine army should at least have 3 units of scouts. And probably Chaos Space Marine should probably have 3 units of Nurglings in there as well. With those units of scouts or Nurglings, particularly scouts, keep them as cheap. They're going to die. Let's face it, they're out there as a human meat shield.
They are there to die.
No, I didn't tell my scouts that.
It'd be bad for morale.
Yeah. Because otherwise things like Khorne Berserkers, Alpha Legion ones, they're just going to run over your whole army turn 1. You absolutely need that screen. Other things to think about is if you deploy a screen round a tank, for example, that can stop people moving in and sort of destroying it turn 1 as well. Other classic things are things like Hive Tyrants. If they deep strike down, they'll be too far away from your sort of valuable units, because you'll have effectively pushed them out to at least 27 inches, won't you? But I think we're getting a bit too much into specifics at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
well, that's a whole other.
Yeah, screening is incredibly complicated. There's so many different sorts of screens.
The key message to take away that is consider the screen as you're deploying.
Yeah. Right, guys. We're going to be back soon. We're going to be talking about our sort of tips and tricks for the different phases of the game. Next up, we're going to be talking about the movement phase, and there's a lot of things you can do there to sort of improve your game.
Great.
Right. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah.